Welcome to Onto Something. On today's episode of Onto Something, we're talking to Rick Nuttall. Rick has been sharing his knowledge and passion for birds with like-minded people from a very, very young age, as you'll hear in this episode. His master's degree involved behavior studies of waxbills and their close relatives. And then he joined the National Museum Bloemfontein as an ornithologist in 1991, undertaking research for 10 years before his appointment as director, a position which he held until November 2017. Rick has authored scientific, semi-scientific and popular ornithological publications and contributes regularly to national bird monitoring and citizen science projects. He has led small group birding trips in South Africa and Lesotho on occasion since 1993 and has travelled widely in Southern Africa. A keen amateur photographer and sound recordist, Rick now leads general nature and specialised birding tours. He has also developed an interest in butterflies, dragonflies and damselflies in recent years. Rick always enjoys sharing his various passions and knowledge with others. He is currently based in Bloemfontein. You said that you've been into birds from a very young age. When you say very young age, how young are we talking and how did that start?
I can't remember my exact age, but I must have been 4 or 5 years old, probably.
Yes.
If I can just go back to my sort of what I can still now recollect of sort of my first impression of a bird, or the first bird that stuck in my memory. I grew up in Grahamstown in the Eastern Cape. Yeah, we lived on a corner plot, and we had a large Cape honeysuckle hedge. Cape honeysuckle, I don't know if you know it. It's a indigenous shrub.
Yeah, and the smell of that during like these spring nights.
Oh, lovely! But it's got these beautiful orange flowers, reddish orange flowers, quite long.
Yeah,
and they produce really nice nectar, lots of nectar, and so they attract nectar-feeding birds.
Yeah,
and my first ever, memory that I can, observation that I can remember was of a male greater double-collared sunbird hovering in front of one of these flowers at our hedge.
Yes.
And these sunbirds are this striking metallic green and blue, and as its name implies, it's got a nice red breastband, and that is the first memory that I have. And I must have been, I would say, probably 4 years old.
Yeah, and now. When I mean, obviously I did it at some point. When did that happen? Like when you were 4 or 5 years old, did you already get into sort of the identification of the birds as well, or was it in just like purely seeing this whole new world? And
I think it was just the wow factor for me, and I must have gone to my dad and said to him, I saw this. What is this? Or he had a good friend. He was lecturing at Rhodes University at the time, and he had a good friend who actually gave him a pair of binoculars, and soon after that, my dad got a copy of Roberts. From, I think it was basically, if I remember the inscription in the inside cover, it was around about like 1964. I'm giving my age away. But, sorry, Roberts is like the Bible, the birding Bible. In those days, there are a lot more resources available these days. Roberts is still there and still very much in the foreground of birding resources and books and things like that. But the Roberts, and I grew up with this tome of Roberts birds of South Africa, I think it was in those days, on my bedside table, and I would page through that every night before I went to sleep and look at the pictures. And some of the illustrations were, well, the majority of them weren't very lifelike. So my dad was interested.
It was illustrations.
It
wasn't photographs.
All illustrations, yeah.
Okay.
But my dad had this friend who was very keen, and so we had a general interest in nature and things. So it might have been pointed out to me as a honeysucker. I think we grew up knowing them as honeysuckers, not sunbirds.
Yeah.
And so I probably knew that it was a honeysucker. But that is my first, the first time that I remember this image is imprinted on my memory.
Yeah, and then from there on, it just grew and grew.
Yeah, I think it was quite slow in the beginning, but
Yeah.
when I started at primary school, we used to have clubs and societies on a Saturday morning, and there was this rather sort of select group of youngsters at school who, I don't know how it happened, but we belonged to like the wildlife club.
Yeah.
And the deputy principal of our school, he had an old Foxy bus combi, and he was of 1820 settler stock, and he knew all the farmers in the area. And we used to go out while the rest of the boys were at school playing chess and making pottery, doing pottery and whatever else the clubs and societies were. We would head out onto the neighboring farms in the area and go and walk, look at birds, trees, rock art. We just had a wonderful time. And I was very, very privileged to be a part of that group. As I say, I must try and find out how I came to be a part of that group. So that really...
Do you still have contact with anyone from that group?
Very much so. I mean, the deputy principal, he's still alive. He's into his 80s.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And I'm in touch with him every now and then. And but yeah, so he was my mentor, and that really sparked that interest for me. And there is a local bird club based down in the Eastern Cape called the Dyers Cross Bird Club. It's got a branch in Grahamstown and a branch down at Kenton-on-Sea, Port Alfred.
Okay.
And as a schoolboy, I think I was aged 10, 11, I joined that Dyers Cross Bird Club, and I'm still a member. Not that I can participate much in their activities, hardly at all, but
surely an honorary member by now.
I've gone back twice, and they have an annual lecture that they invite someone to come in and give. I've done it twice.
That's awesome.
Which is fantastic, and both times especially the more recent time, which was probably 3 or 4 years ago, I just reminisced about, that's where it all started for me, and how my journey has taken me from there, and how grateful I am for that experience. So, I think that those were formative years for me in terms of my birding.
Yeah, and that one teacher just played, or the vice principal that played this sort of pivotal role.
Yeah, for sure, because he would, the bird club, they would have outings on Sundays, and he would come pick us up at school, and we'd go off in his combi, and we'd go out with all the old folks. And you can imagine, for us as school kids, hardly in our teens, this was, and there were a couple of other guys, but I sort of was the one who stuck it out, I think, and was very, very keen and passionate about it. And yeah, that was where it really started. I think then. School. I then went on to high school, and we had a natural history society at school. I was very involved in that. They had a magazine, and that's where my writing actually started.
It's awesome the opportunities that got created by these schools.
Yeah, and we could write for this natural history magazine, which was called Red Wing. Interesting, there is a bird called a red-winged starling, a rooivlek spreeu, which is a local bird for us and a very common bird in the Grahamstown area. But there's also a European bird called a redwing. It's a type of thrush.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering now that I mentioned that name, whether that name came from the British, origins of the school, or whether it was
because it could be either
an abbreviation of red-winged starling. But anyway, so that gave me the opportunity to write up observations and write up interesting things. And it was during that time that. I mean, I remember we lived in Grahamstown. I remember, I've often thought, how did my interest in these little seed-eating birds start, and the waxbills, saces. And sadly, I think it probably one incident had a lot to do with that, and that was we moved to a new house closer to the city centre in Grahamstown. And I got hold of an old cake tin lid and nailed it upside down onto the top of a fence post, close to some vegetation in the garden, and would put seed there. And it was a little seed feeding tray. And these beautiful, one of my all-time favourite birds called a swee waxbill. They're the most beautiful little birds. They've just got the most amazing colours. I could describe those colours, but just for me as a young enthusiastic bird watcher, birder, just with this passion for birds, to attract these little birds to this feeder. I mean, I think that's a special thing. I think for anybody, when they put a feeder up, it's what are we gonna get?
What's the first one going to be? What's the most special one going to be?
And I from a very young age, I've kept birds in a sort of fairly largish cage, and canaries and budgies and things like that. But and this little feeding tray was quite close to where I had quite a sort of a sizable cage with my budgies and canaries. So it was spilt seed, and I think these little birds used to come and feed on the seed that felt, was spilt from the cage.
Chat a bit with your cage birds, probably showed off to them.
And so then I put up this feeder slightly out of the way, and sadly our cat caught caught a male swee, one of the birds at the feeder, and I was devastated by this. Anyway, I took this little bird through my bird club connections to our local museum, the Albany Museum, where there was a bird department, and there was an honorary curator who happened to be a member of our bird club. Her name was Dorothy Salter, and she arranged to have that little bird made into a skin for me. So it was just this little bird lying stuffed on its back.
The cat didn't do too much damage?
No, it didn't. So it was still in beautiful condition. So I kept that in a little box. This little skin, we call it a study skin of a swee waxbill male in a little box for decades probably. I eventually threw it out because the clothes moths had got in and they had eaten the feathers and it was just falling apart. And I think that's where my interest in and just absolute amazement of these little colourful seed-eating birds and the sounds that they make came into it. And I then we moved to Pretoria, and I stayed on at boarding school in Grahamstown. But one of the things that I did is I built myself a nice big aviary with the help of my opa, who was very handy, and he used to live with us. And when I went back for holidays, I would just spend time sitting in front of this aviary, sometimes inside the aviary, but usually on a log outside, just watching these birds and making notes of how they behaved and everything. And the local nature conservation authorities in those days actually caught wild waxbills, these birds, and used to sell them.
Oh, okay.
To make money. Yeah. I mean, it was the sort of cage bird trade in those days, but it was all above board, and you went out to Hartbeesfontein, Hartbeespoort Dam out there, and you went into this room, and it was filled with cages, and you could select your birds that you wanted, and little blue waxbills were R1 a pair, and violet-eared waxbills were R5 a pair, and that was hell of expensive in those days. But anyway, so I stocked my aviary with these birds, and I looked after them very carefully. I tried to create as natural an environment with a little stream and bushes and grass and everything in this walk-in aviary of mine. Yeah. And I used to sit there, coming back from boarding school, holidays, and just observe.
Because you wanted to understand the behavior. So is that part of the motivation of creating a natural setting for them? You didn't want a cage bird. You wanted
Absolutely. And my philosophy was, if I can get these birds to breed, then it's as natural as can be.
Yeah.
So, and birds did breed, sometimes not successfully, but at least they tried. But that then was the subject matter for writing up my observations in these natural history magazines like the one we had at school. And I've kept that interest, and still to this day, I mean, I write now for scientific publications on the odd
you
occasion.
You just up the game a bit.
Yeah, but on that particular group of birds. So it's fascinating actually just thinking about this, because that's where it all started.
Yeah.
And, here I am, having a career behind me and a career that's continuing, and that's where it all started,
And
but,
probably a world expert on those specific, on those wax balls.
Well, it's been great to be able to contribute to some of the, of the sort of regional reference works on those particular, certain of those species in that group. It's just wonderful that's it goes back to those humble beginnings in Grahamstown, where I was introduced to these birds, and they just gripped my imagination and a lot more. And
at Varsity, where did you?
Varsity, I studied in Pietermaritzburg at what was then the University of Natal, now University of KwaZulu-Natal. And I remember traveling down with my mother. We went by train from Pretoria, where we lived, when I was in Standard 9, what's that, grade 11. We took the train down to Pietermaritzburg. My mum's older sister used to live there, so we had a place to stay, and we've got family connections in KZN, so there was always meeting up with the family if we were ever visiting. But the main purpose of that particular trip was to go and meet up with Professor Gordon McLean, who's a very well known in ornithological circles and academia. He was an academic at the University of Natal in Pietermaritzburg.
Grade 11 already for you.
Yeah, and he was actually responsible for editing some of the editions of this Roberts reference book. And I went to go and I set up a meeting with him, and we went down on the train, and I went to go and speak to him about a career in ornithology. So this was when I was at high school in Grahamstown, and obviously I was linking up with people all the time who were involved in birds, in studying birds at the university and through the bird club network and everything, meeting researchers and listening to talks and everything. And I obviously got to hear about Professor Gordon McLean, and we decided that I would probably be going to University of Natal rather than UCT, because University of Cape Town, which was the other main bird where you could study ornithology, they had the Percy FitzPatrick Institute of African Ornithology, quite a mouthful.
Ornithology is already a mouthful for Afrikaans guys.
Voelkunde, and anyway, so UCT and the Fitzstitute, or the FitzPatrick Institute, as it's now affectionately known, was just a bit far from home. So Maritzburg was a bit closer. Anyway, we went and had a chat with Gordon McLean. I can't remember much about the chat, but I ended up going and doing my undergrad studies in zoology and botany, and then doing zoology honours and zoology masters. And Gordon McLean was my supervisor, my sort of academic mentor, and became a good friend of mine. So that was Varsity, and of course I think by the time I left school and went to Varsity, I was fully into just birds and nature big time, and doing subjects at university where we had field work and prac sessions, and you were with a whole bunch of other like-minded people. We had such fun on our field trips, and we'd go away for these, particularly as we got further into our undergrad studies, second and third year, we'd go off on field trips up to the Drakensberg, down to the coast. We had one fantastic field trip, but I think that was when we were in honours already, up to the Pongola, near Jacini, up in that area in northern KwaZulu-Natal. And we just had such fun, and all the time, you with other people who are enthusiastic about nature and birds and bugs and plants and mammals and all sorts. So you just feed off one another. And I think that if I think back to when I was well and truly hooked, it must have been probably in my later years at high school.
Yeah.
And then it was just, this is what I want to do.
This is the way that it's going to go from that point in time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and here we sit today. I mean, it's basically been my life.
Many moons later, and here we still are.
Yeah.
You just spoke about the two hotspots, I suppose, for studying ornithology at that point. The hotspots in terms of actual birding in South Africa. Too many to mention, or like where would you say is the prem spot in South Africa?
Look, it depends what what criteria you're using. If you're looking for diversity, just the highest number of species, the greatest range and diversity and variety, I think you need to be looking in the north and northeast of the country. So Zululand, northern KwaZulu-Natal, up towards the Mozambique border, and then even from Gauteng, moving north, moving east. To the Lowveld, Mpumalanga, up into Limpopo. We have an annual sort of bird race event, if we can call it like that. It's called Birding Big Day, and it's normally runs on the last Saturday of every year, last Saturday of November every year. So it's coming up fairly soon. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind that is that you have teams of either 3 or 4 people who go out, and during a 24-hour period, midnight to midnight, within a 50-kilometer radius of a central spot that you can choose anywhere, you record as many bird species as possible, using sight and sound. And the criterion is that at least, I think it's, 2 of a group of 3 or 3 of the group of 4 must agree on the identification.
Okay.
And the top teams that are getting scores in excess of 330 species in 24 hours are based up, and usually up in Limpopo, Mpumalanga. The top teams used to be in northern KZN. So that's
340 within 24.
Yeah, 330 around about there, 330
that
plus
is
within
insane.
24 hours. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are some of the top birders in the country that participate in this event and that achieve those scores. But then if you look at a handicap system where you go down into the Karoo and the guys who are getting like 40 or 50 species are winning on a handicap basis.
Is it handicap percentage based then?
Percentage based.
What you can expect to see.
Yeah. And we've got very good data from Atlas projects, from particular areas. So if you enter the handicap category, then that's what you look at. So, but there's some very, very special birds. South Africa has got numerous species that occur nowhere else in the world.
Okay.
Or they might occur marginally up into Namibia, into Botswana. But there are a number of species, particularly in the more arid areas, that are found only in this region. So those are pretty special areas, and I would regard those as hotspots as well.
Yeah.
So it all
especially,
depends.
I suppose, for tourists coming over here for birding.
Yeah, I mean, foreign birders coming to South Africa, they need to spend time in the arid parts of the country, because there you've got a whole bunch of these little brown jobs, these larks that occur in those areas, the corons that occur in those areas, the Karoo and up into the Northern Cape. We've got some species that at a family level occur only in South Africa, and that includes Lesotho and Swaziland, and maybe there's some populations in eastern Zimbabwe. But those are the sugarbirds, different to the sunbirds that I was referring to earlier. These are much larger, but also nectar feeding birds. Anyone who's been walking in Kirstenbosch National Botanical Gardens in Cape Town, and through the Proteas, they will probably have seen a Cape sugarbird. They've got a long decurved bill and a nice long tail. They're fairly sizable birds. And I mean, Cape sugarbird and Gurney sugarbird is the second species. they're found nowhere else in the world.
No.
There's a small population of Guernsey sugarbirds in the eastern highlands of Zimbabwe and western highlands of Mozambique, up in the Chimanimani area. So if you're a birder working on your global bird list and you need to get the Promeropidi, the sugarbirds, you have to come to South Africa.
Okay.
And if you want both species, you've got a very good chance of seeing both species. They're easy to see. You definitely need to come to South Africa because Cape sugarbird only occurs in South Africa. And there's another two species, the rock jumpers, the Cape rock jumper and the Drakensberg rock jumper, that again occur in the mountainous areas, both in the Fynbos and then in the more sort of Drakensberg mountain areas. You have to come here to see. Nowhere else in the world are you going to find those birds.
Yeah.
So those are just two examples of what makes, areas that wouldn't be a diversity hotspot, but makes them definitely a birding hotspot. And the Cape Fynbos area it's unique in the world. It's a unique plant kingdom, and it comes with its suite of unique fauna.
Because that's the thing, your interests, your main interest is birds, but it goes way beyond that in actual fact. I mean, if you speak to you for 10 minutes, you realize birds it's definitely the highest point, but it is only the tip of the iceberg of your knowledge, and that's why it's so awesome to always talk to you. So the fauna in the Fynbos, you said.
Yeah, it's incredible, and you get all sorts of other things there as well. Yes, I mean a keen interest that I've developed in recent times has been in butterflies and dragonflies and damselflies. Other flying.
What is a damselfly?
A damselfly is in layman's terms, probably it's a small dragonfly.
Okay.
So you get the larger dragonflies. Most of them sit with their wings out at perpendicular to the body. Dragonflies. Yeah. Damselflies generally sit with their wings parallel to their bodies, so they can fold their wings against their bodies.
Okay.
And they are significantly smaller, more damsel-like as opposed to more dragon-like.
More dragon-like. I mean, I remember I have some fond memories of chasing dragonflies at school. I mean, when you a primary school kid, if you could catch one of those, you felt like a champion. Yeah. But there's no ways, because I mean that thing can turn 90 degrees, like in a question of like milliseconds. It just goes out of your direction.
They're incredibly agile and mobile
and quick. Yeah.
Very, very quick.
I mean, I remember we would have like 20 people chasing one, and then you'd see if one of you can't get to it. But there's almost no way. It's just too nimble and quick.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, I mean, something that you've touched on and that I didn't know is how competitive, I suppose, the birding, well, I say competitive, but like the competitions that you have and people wanting to see these birds and like really putting effort into getting into these, as you say, the areas that wouldn't otherwise be considered diversity hotspots, I suppose. Just for the birds that you can see there.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's something that I wasn't aware of at all. And it's very cool to think that it creates opportunities. I mean, I suppose it's dried up with COVID now, unfortunately. But you probably can't wait for that to open up again and have some foreigners, because they probably get wowed by what we have in South Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think being involved in the tourism sector, COVID has really knocked that, particularly from a travel point of view, and most particularly from a foreign travel point of view. But just let me touch on the sort of competitive side of things. I think in life, I think anybody who collects anything, there's that competitive element.
Yeah.
And I think that, what are we doing with birds? You collecting a set of experiences, a set of species, the units of what it is that you're collecting. It could be stamps, it could be geocaching, it could be whatever. And everybody's passionate about. I think so many people collect things. There's a diverse array of opportunities for that. And I think that it just it sort of breeds that competitive element.
Yeah.
Birders are there are a lot of competitive people out there. I wouldn't call myself competitive at all.
I just think by nature you're a bit relaxed.
No, yeah, for sure. I think that if there's an opportunity, I just think of an experience I've just been now. I've been on in the Karoo and doing bird surveys, and the driver for me, one of the major drivers, is to get as much out of the opportunity as possible that you're having. So you don't just sit back and stay in one spot and just take things each day as it comes. You're out there looking for things, and I think particularly with my interest being broader than birds, you're out there. You're looking at almost everything that moves.
We went on a very freezing Karoo winter night drive, so that definitely solidifies your interest in getting out.
Yeah, for sure. No, you must make use of every opportunity.
On a cold night like that, then you definitely make use of every chance.
And so I think that there's this, for me, it's this sense of wonder and sense of adventure. And I think coming back to the opportunities that nature provides for us who are passionate about it and passionate about sharing it with other people. For me, it's that sense of adventure, and that's what I like to facilitate. I like to facilitate exposure to that sense of adventure. For other people.
Almost watching the people as much as the birds, like seeing these people see these birds for the first time that they've been hunting for a long while.
Absolutely, and that goes to anything to do with nature, the stars, whatever. Being out on those night drives and seeing those amazing nocturnal mammals, I'll do it over and over and over again, and I think that's one of the reasons that drives, the guy on whose farm we were at, Pierre.
Yeah.
For that, he goes out how often, hey? And yet he'll be seeing the same things over and over again. You could think people might get bored by that, but it's the sense of wonderment of being out there and opening that opportunity up for other people, and yes, experiencing with them.
Yeah, exactly.
The excitement of the experience.
Seeing it through their eyes almost for the first time every time.
Absolutely.
Seeing the hippo there in the Karoo was just, for me, it was like mind-blowing. You stand there and this thing is 5 meters from you.
Yeah.
And it feels so natural and it feels right, if that makes sense.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, going back to the competitive element, yes. There are any number of lists that people ascribe to.
So that's what I wanted to ask. You spoke about the global sort of index. What numbers are we looking at? If you look at the full range of what you can...
Yeah. You're probably looking at... look, I don't know exactly what it is at the moment, or even an estimate close, but it's 9,000-10,000 species, or maybe 10,000 plus is the global number of bird species. So
that's incredible.
There's some people who've been birding their whole lives, and they're up in the 8,000s. I think that there's we've got a well-known South African legend. I'm not going to mention names, but he's up there, but he travels the world looking at birds. And you get many people who do that. They travel the world.
Yes.
And it's that list,
But is he doing it only because you have the sort of scientific curiosity of understanding the creatures as well? Is he chasing the experiences more than the...
Well, I think a bit of both.
Yeah.
But if you just think of the time and the effort that it takes to do that, exactly. and of course the resources, you need the resources. But if you're running your own top nature travel company, and you can do this, and it's funded by your clients, that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
And so that's how a lot of these guys do it. But there are a lot of world birders who are well resourced, and this is what they do. They spend all their time out there traveling the world. They might start off saying, I want to see a representative of each of the bird families on each of the continents.
Okay.
If they could, so that's the sort of, but then If we bring it locally, back home, there's the 800 Club. We've got in excess of 900 species. I think it's about 930 plus on the Southern African list now, which is everything south of the Kunene and the Zambezi. Falls in the Southern African sub-region.
Okay.
And, so if you get to 700 species, you're doing well. But if you get to 800, then you're in an elite group.
Yeah.
And if you get to 850, obviously the top of the pyramid's getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And, some of the top guys, they're probably, in the 900 and above 900, 950, 920. So they've almost cleaned up on everything. Look, I speak under correction. I don't have all the stats at my fingertips, but the guys who sing 900 plus, the species that have grown our total to that total are vagrants. So they'll be birds that pitch up once in a blue moon, and so these guys, when these birds pitch up, they are spending a lot of time and resources to get to the right place.
Imagine
ASAP to pick up on these birds.
So they'll get a message telling them.
Yeah, and we've got a rare bird alert community in the region, and with technology these days and social media, messages are out there quickly.
Yeah.
I was this morning before coming to chat with you, I was just checking on my WhatsApp groups, but there are any number of these things, and there are people who, they hear about something. They're based in Gauteng. They hear about something that's pitched up down in the Western Cape. Of course, it's the tip of the continent, so birds that shouldn't be there. They've flown in the wrong direction, or they've come off the wrong continent, maybe from the Americas.
They're a bit missing when you see Cape Town, you've messed up somewhere.
So they just head down the coast or whatever, and they come to this point, and there's nowhere further to go. It's open ocean anyway. So Cape Town and those surrounding areas are they've got these rarities pitching up. Guys in Gauteng, they'll be sorting out. Boy, I need to get on the earliest flight to Cape Town to be able to go and twitch this bird, and we call it's called twitching, and the origin of that word comes from the movement, the twitch, the sort of anxious twitching movement, or that excitement that goes with it. So but it's
but I can imagine seeing someone like that, seeing the bird that they've just put this effort into seeing.
High fives. And there's usually a group of people.
Exactly.
And, there's this community of people who will do these kind of things. And I speak with the highest respect for these people. I'm very good friends with a number of them. I wouldn't necessarily do it, but if I was close by, I would definitely go and share in the experience and tick the bird, hopefully. But, so there is a quite a competitive element, and particularly the people who are up in the sort of higher echelons of those lists. But then you get people who have their own lists. You can have your year list. There's a wonderful app called Bird Lasser that's been developed, and many of us use it, and it's a bird logging program, a listing program. So you basically it puts a GPS coordinate and a timestamp on every record that you log. So it tracks everything.
You can see a history.
And what's nice is that you can sign up for these annual or time-related challenges, as they call them. And a couple of them that I'm signed up for are Southern African Bird List, so Southern Africa, South Africa, things like we've got a Hinterland Challenge, which is basically Bloem and Kimberley.
Okay.
And then Eastern Free State.
Lots of Adidas, I can tell you that.
or it could be that there's a Gauteng Challenge or a KZN, and so I'm just at the beginning of the year I just go and register for these, and as you travel through the country during the year, wherever you go, you're just logging using BirdLasser. It's automatically updating these lists of yours. And so every now and then you can go in and you can go back and you can check and you can see how am I doing for my own sake, but how am I doing in relation to other people who are also keeping lists for, and it's not that you're actually competing against other people. It's not this competition. It's just, it's a wonderful way of just keeping track of your own activities and in certain areas and seeing how your mates are doing.
I suppose you're answering the question that I had for you is how do you get, like, suppose you want to start getting into bird watching and sort of ticking these lists. I suppose that's a good place to start then. Like a good pair of binoculars and a...
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we look at what sort of tools do we need, to get into any kind of occupation or hobby.
Yeah.
And I know of a guy. He was arguably one of Southern Africa's, best field naturalists and ornithologists, a guy called Carl Vernon. He passed away recently, but he rarely used binoculars. So he relied on his eyesight and his ears when he was out in the field, and he had, kept notes and things like that. So, but yes, pair of binoculars helps tremendously. There's a wide range of of models available, and that information, there's a lot of information available for people who know nothing about these things as to how to go about choosing an appropriate pair of optics. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you need to know what budget you've got. My advice would just be to say, go for the best you can afford, and then when you can afford better, do that.
Yeah.
We are tremendously blessed with a wide range of birding resources in terms of books, field guides, high quality field guides. There's the Roberts Field Guide, which has morphed from the reference manual, basically.
Okay.
The original one that I referred to earlier was not a field guide. It was a combination of a sort of a reference book with illustrations. It was all that was available for many, many years that covered basically all of the species that occur in our region or sub-region. There were some other ones that covered certain of the, just certain of the species. And then there's another field guide called Newman's Field Guide, which was really good when it came out in 1983 because there was only Roberts at that stage. So it filled the sort of unfilled niche of what we now know as field guides. Basically nice illustrations with the distribution map and just key features, what to look for, where to look for them.
Is there sound reference to sound as well? Or?
No, just transcriptions of descriptions of the sounds they make, which is not very, very good. Yeah. And then but more recently, there's been Sasol, which was a real step up in terms of of the field guide, and then Roberts has come out more recently with a field guide as well. Guide. So, and then there are the photographic field guides. It was a Sinclair photographic field guide. Many people, I think, particularly beginners, they like the photographs more than the illustrations. But for me, the illustrations in those days, gave far more flexibility in terms of how a bird could be positioned to best show important features.
So in a photo, you might miss some of those distinct.
But with the advent of digital technology and just so many people taking top quality photographs these days, some of the the resources that are now available with photos are absolutely brilliant.
But I suppose that's half the struggle is if you want to claim that you've seen this bird, do you need to take a pic? I suppose you need some sort of evidence in order to be recognized, I suppose. Or is there some controversy in the birding world as well?
Oh, there always will be. But particularly when it comes to rarities, I mean, we have systems in place now. I mean, so many people are using this bird lasser app
that you can track
to log bird species. So you can't use it for identification, but so just in terms of getting information about a record or a sighting into the birding domain, public domain, it's rapid, so the possibility, and yes, I mean, so many people now have, the cameras and the lenses that they can use to take photographs of things, but we have a whole system of submission of rarities, of records. So that's why I mentioned Bird Lasser, because you can actually submit those records to a Bird Atlas project. It's a separate thing to the logging, but it's built into the app. You just basically need to be registered for the Bird Atlas project. And you just submit. You just hit submit, and it just sends all that information through to the Bird Atlas project. And there's an automatic process of vetting of records.
Okay.
Remember, each record has got a GPS coordinate, exactly. and well, that's the important thing. So it compares that record to the distribution of that particular species from all the other records that are in the database. Yes. And if it's out of range, the known range, it'll spit out an out of range request. Automatically. It's all computer generated. So you will get, you registered for the project, you will get via email, you'll get an out of range query, and then you need to follow a process, and you can add photos to support your sighting, sound recordings, and all that, descriptions and everything like that. So but a lot of people these days, and I find people who are getting into birding, a camera comes with them. And they like to photograph the birds they're seeing as well, and particularly if it's something that's quite unusual, they like to do that, and very often you can do that. But I think it's very much up to the individual as to how they go about it. Very often you'll hear the question asked, how can you decide whether you tick that or you don't? How good enough must the sighting be for you to accept it as, I've now seen that species?
Yeah.
And that's up to you entirely. If it comes to wanting to claim a rarity for a particular spot, then you must know right from the outset that you need to have a photograph or a sound recording of that particular bird, because that's how things work these days. You need to be able to verify your sighting. So, but for your own purposes, I mean, one of the sort of, I think, top birds on any southern African and wherever this bird occurs in Africa, people who are birding in those areas, one of the sort of maybe top 10 is a bird called a Pell's fishing owl. It's a big sort of pumpkin orange, not quite pumpkin orange, but brownish orange owl that feeds on fish. So you find it along these river systems in Kruger, in Botswana, further north, along these large river systems with these big trees, and they roost in these trees, and they come out at night and they fish.
And they fish at night?
Yeah. And interestingly enough, most owl species have got specially modified feathers on their wings,
so that they're silent. Basically.
Yeah,
I've seen.
And fishing owl doesn't have those modifications to its feathers.
It just doesn't need it. Does it go beneath the water surface?
Basically, it goes feet first and it will catch fish, and it's got specially roughened scales on the undersides of its feet for the slippery scales.
I mean, that's fascinating.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's high up on any birder's wish list.
Okay.
I've seen a Pell's fishing owl on the one of the rivers up in northern Kruger flying away, through the trees, and there might well be people who would tick that. They would say, "No, that's good enough for me."
Yeah,
I haven't ticked it, so it's still
outstanding.
It's still outstanding for me, and so I just use that as an illustration of that's my way of doing it. And I mean, I was on a recent trip to Namakwaland to go and see flowers and birds. And we, high on the list was this one particular warbler species that occurs on these rocky koppies up in Namakwaland and Northern Cape, in the Bushmanland. And we saw a bird that, if I think of all the factors, it could only have been this particular species.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tick it. I don't know if the guys who were on the trip with me will hear me saying this, because just as part of the group, we celebrated seeing this particular species. But it's not on my list yet. I'm going to go back and I want to.
Because the thing is, you're doing it for the experience, and
I think for me, if I saw what I saw there again, I would not be too happy with it.
Yeah.
So I need to be focused, and the problem with that particular thing, I don't want to, spend much time on this, but I was focusing on another species, another bird that was in the vicinity, and I was trying to find that for these folks, and so I got a little bit confused. As experienced as I am, I got confused with what I was actually looking at, and I think that's just my reason for not putting that bird on my list. But other people in the group, they were quite happy with it, and they took it. So. That's fine, I don't have a problem with that. So all of this stemmed from you asking about the sort of competitive element and tourism and everything like that. So I think that there's a healthy competition. In some circles, people might say there's an unhealthy competition. But I think overall it's healthy. It supports.
It keeps the world.
It supports an industry.
Yeah.
If I think of what they have done for some of these twitches, as we call them. So if a rare bird pitches up, it's called a twitch. It's referred to as a twitch. Did you go to the citrine wagtail twitch? Did you go to the Temming stint twitch?
Yeah.
Did you go to the little crake twitch? And what the guys who are involved with reporting the rarities, in this network is, they'll put out a brief survey afterwards and say, we just want to get an idea of how many people came to see this bird, where they came from, how they travelled, how many times did they come and see it. Sometimes people don't get it.
It's almost a study of the study now.
And so look, I mean, these birds, sometimes it's a freak accident that these birds they've
end up where they are.
They've gone the wrong way. So the chances of them surviving is many times is probably quite slim, because they should be heading north and they've headed south and they've hit the Cape. They've hit the Cape Peninsula and they can't go anywhere. But so we do have an idea of the economic benefits of these twitches to the economy and to the industry. So that's good. But then, just in terms of birding tourism, I mean, it's a massive contributor.
Yeah.
And I just think it's wonderful to be involved in something that, as I say, where you can facilitate people who are passionate about things. You can facilitate their passion in the area, in your neck of the woods, in the areas that you know well. You can facilitate opening up those experiences and sharing those experiences with people. And if it's making a contribution to the economy and you're able to,
and to science itself.
That's another very, very important thing.
Because I know you do your recordings. That was for Bird Atlas. Or what's that?
Yeah, the recordings. That's also
of it. The sightings is only one part.
We can get on to talk about that. But the recordings. Again, it's like an observation. A sighting is a sight record. A recording of a particular species is an acoustic record.
Yeah.
It's still very much
recognized
as. That's a record of a species in that place, and we can talk about the recordings and what one does with those recordings.
Yeah.
As we go on. So, but yeah, I mean, birding is a wonderful community. I think that we might have touched on this when I met you in the Karoo, was that, with an interest in birds, even a passing interest, there are birds all over the world. You will find birds anywhere. So you waiting for a bus, you're waiting for a whatever, for a Uber, whatever. There are birds around. You're waiting for an appointment. My daughter's just finishing up. She's about to start writing her matric exams at a school here in Bloem. And, it's heartwarming for me when she comes back home and she says, it was so nice. They've had a time where, they've had to go and, attend extra classes in preparation for matric.
Yeah.
And so she has maybe gone to a classroom at school where she wouldn't normally have gone,
Yeah.
And she says to me, it was so nice because it was on the outside of it was on the quadrangle with at the school, and there were all these trees in the quadrangle, and there was a Cape Robin chat singing, or a Swartkeel geelvink, a masked weaver that was sizzling its song, and it was so nice to hear that, and it's just heartwarming for me, because how many matric school kids are there that would be aware of the sound, and then, be able to put that, sound to a particular species. And so, yeah, I think that it's...
Do you think birding is an exercise in mindfulness to that?
Absolutely.
To that end, I suppose.
We can talk for hours about that. I think that, there's I think that this is something that I also would love to be involved in. And, I find... for example, I find washing dishes quite therapeutic.
Yeah.
But it's the whole experience that goes with it, because I have recordings on my phone, soundscapes, natural soundscapes. And so I put my phone up on the windowsill, and I've got a lovely view out onto the garden, and, nice warm water and everything. And I've got my soundscape, and I close the door into the place where the dishes get washed. And I just disappear into this different world with the sound. And so, I mean, birding, there are different aspects to it, but I think being out there birding, definitely, mindfulness, this is all, they're all in the same boat. And I find I draw incredibly from being out there in nature, generally in
being
nature.
Aware of.
But just being able to, feed on the sounds and the sights and the smells.
All of the senses get involved in there.
Yeah. Interesting, I follow a Facebook group called Ornithology.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what it's about. It's the whole thing. It's based in the US. But it's this whole thing of, letting birds... in a sense, minister to people, to let people, be incredibly mindful in the presence of birds.
Because there's a spiritual element to it as well, and people will say that birds carry a sort of spiritual weight with them, if that makes sense.
And I think, the dawn, being out early in the morning and when the birds are starting to sing, starting to get light, everything is just right. And there's a definite sense of spirituality in that.
I mean, it's the way humans woke up for the majority of our existence is with this bird song. And only recently you have to hear cars outside and people hooting. So, I mean, I think it's...
very interesting that during hard lockdown, and there have been scientific studies done on this, to show how many people, and it worked both ways, I think, how many people became more aware of bird sounds just because of the lack of anthropomorphic sound, man-made sound. And the studies have shown that birds actually flourished in terms of there was more song. There was
they were doing
more
they also
diverse
enjoyed
song. So there was not the interference of all of this man-made sound, noise.
Yeah.
And so it it sort of gave a bit of a return to the natural state.
Yeah.
Where birds could function normally, in terms of their communication. It was fascinating to see also, in the same light, to see film footage of seabirds, cormorants, on the west coast down near Cape Town, coming into the beaches, and where there would normally be people, and they just wouldn't come in, either coming in close in the water or actually onto the beaches. And they were just covered with birds, that you just don't see this, when there are people around. So I think that, there's your comment about the strong links between birds equals nature and mindfulness, very, very strong.
Because just from my own side, I try to be aware of what I see. I'm not an expert or a birder by any means, actually, but I try to be mindful when I'm out in whatever nature you could call Gauteng, where I'm about. But there's nice spots. And the other day I went for a walk, and I think it was a blowcronful. I'm not sure whether it's possible even. I googled it and it said it is, they could be there in Gauteng. I saw a blowcronful, and then 5 minutes later I saw a white dove, within 5 minutes of each other. And that to me felt like a little wink from nature, if that makes sense, because it's I'm out running often, and here's this little sort of, I see you from Mother Nature, and that's why I wanted to touch on the spiritual element of this, because at that point I was like, wow, this is, and it's so silly, I suppose, but it felt profound at that point. So I can definitely see how.
No, I think that if you're open to being mindful about things, those profound experiences they're out there all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, that might take a little bit of the special nature away from a profound experience, but for those who are open to those kind of things, I think that there's just so much out there in the small things, in the bigger things, that nature provides for us. And I take a walk where we live, just on the outskirts of town here in Bloemfontein, and they're lovely sort of natural areas, and just little things, a bud, bursting into flower, or new leaves, or just the texture of the bark of a tree, or something like that. All of those things, I think, just they reached a different level, and
you almost feel sorry for people who don't notice such. It's
absolutely, and I would love to be more involved with, as I say, opening up those experiences for people.
Yeah.
Because I think it can make a fundamental change to the way that people view their world.
I think so too.
And it's an easy thing to do. It's a basic thing to do.
But it is something that needs to happen at a young age, or it helps when it happens at a young age.
Very much so.
You're not going to take a 40-year-old and now suddenly get them interested in, or get them noticing these things easily.
Yeah, I think it'll take a lot more effort.
Yeah. I mean, my best friend from primary school, he is, he was my best friend in high school as well, but we come a long way. And he is a bird guide in the Pilanesberg. And so when he heard I'm going to talk to you, he was quite jealous of me, to be honest. He was like, "Oh no, you're gonna have a very, very good chat." He's a very knowledgeable guy.
Yeah.
But I believe that his interest in these things, I mean, we come from Bloemfontein, and he was on the farm, because they have a farm right outside Bloemfontein. But I believe a large part of his interest was sparked from voortrekkers, because we did voortrekkers together, which like the scouts, I suppose, for in an English sense.
Yeah.
And I mean, that it gave you, even if it's not your passion, it gave you interest in that, and to notice those things. And I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I mean, I've spoken at length about where it all started for me, and essentially that was like a voortrekker experience in primary school. You know, those belonging to a wildlife club, you have that exposure, and you have mentors, you have people who are passionate, showing you things and infusing you as a youngster. And I think I've always, you know, seen, you know, my role in our local bird club, for instance, as you have a wonderful opportunity to change people's lives. And by that I mean by introducing them to and making them enthusiastic about birds and the natural world. And I just remember 2 young guys who joined our bird club. They were members of our local BirdLife Free State here in Bloem. And when they were at school, and we did bird ringing outings. We use, bird ringing, you put up these fine nylon mesh mist nets, so birds don't see them. You put them in their flight paths in the shade, and they fly into them and they get entangled. But you have to undergo extensive long-term training to use this equipment, and you have to do it under license. From conservation authorities and from the ringing authority. The whole idea is that you're using this as a means to to carry out research. And what you do is the birds you catch, you put individually numbered aluminium rings on their legs that weigh next to nothing, and you release the bird. You collect all the information about the bird, its weight, what species it is, how its feathers are growing, all of that sort of stuff, and then you release the bird. And if you are doing this exercise at the same site over time, you might well get that bird in your nets again later. And it might happen to be a bird that's actually flown to Botswana. It's migrated to Botswana for the winter, and it's come back again, and you've caught it in the same spot a year later. We can talk about this as well, because I've done a lot of this. But we had these 2 youngsters who were at school, and they joined our bird club, and they came to our ringing outings. We would have ringing outings for interested members of the public, but mainly bird club members.
Yeah, and it's because it's not something, normal birding they can do on their own. But for this, they now need someone who's licensed.
Yeah. And, they became very competent birders. But here were 2 youngsters who were interested, and I saw it. I felt I had a huge responsibility with my knowledge and my experience to actually nurture this interest in these guys.
I'm getting chills actually now.
I managed to do that, and that to me was, those are the situations where I feel, that's where I can make a difference. And I've made a difference in those people's lives, because, the one guy now, he emigrated and he's married and he lives in New Zealand. He's a fanatical fly fisherman, but he's hooked on nature. Excuse the pun. And everyone that comes into contact with him, they will get the same treatment, of this enthusiastic, passionate person. And,
it's the same with your daughter though. As you mentioned earlier, what matric would be able to identify birds by their calls. Yeah. But you actually just unlocked a little, like almost buried memory of mine, because you were the responsible for the birds, or that whole birding section in the National Museum as well.
That's correct.
And I think there was one of these, what's the term you use now for that?
Mist net.
Yeah.
In the display?
In the display, I think there was
That's
one
correct,
of these.
Yes,
These
there's a panel on mist netting.
Yes,
and using it for research. Yeah.
You actually just unlocked that. That's
you remember seeing that?
I remember seeing. You just unlocked this sort of repressed memory. But that's something we can talk about, as well as your time at the museum, where you, you were responsible for the ornithology exhibitions there, and a lot of memories come flooding back. For example, that big nest. I remember that, for example, and there was turnstile things, and then you needed to match the
bill
bird with
and
its
the feet
food
and the food. And
yes,
everything.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it was so well done. So when I met you earlier this year, it was almost like you don't know this, but even through that indirect channel, you played a role in my life, and I believe many people who went through that exhibition's life through that channel as well.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear. I unfortunately can't claim to take responsibility for that exhibition because it happened before I actually arrived, just before I arrived at the National Museum.
Okay.
But yeah, I that was my first formal employment was as ornithologist, Voelkundige at the National Museum, head of the very small ornithology department. And part of that responsibility, what came with that responsibility, was to carry out research, on topics of my own choice, but that related to, understanding relationships between different groups of birds, be they families, species, genera, populations. Also to be involved.
So I just want when you speak about families, what what groupings are we talking here? Like, what's an example of families within?
Okay, families would be let me just think of it in layman's terms. Families would be like doves.
Yeah,
the dove family, doves and pigeons are in a family, or sparrows, morsies. Maybe not a very good, but they will be in a particular family. I referred earlier to the sugar birds. They are in a family on their own.
And that's specific.
Mouse birds, macefoils, they're in a family on their own. It's an African family.
Okay.
You have to come to Africa to see mouse birds.
Is macefoils only?
It's African. It's an Africa-specific family. Yeah, it's one of the ones that are endemic to Africa. What else could we take? Does that help? So it's a higher level grouping, family, and then you have this hierarchical structure, and just like we are Homo sapiens, genus Homo, species sapiens. You have, for example, you'll have let's take a sparrow. You'll have a Cape sparrow. I can't remember the genus name for a Cape sparrow. My goodness. But anyway, so the sparrow is the genus. It belongs to a bigger family.
Yes.
But you have the genus, and then the species is the Cape. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the sort of hierarchical level. Sorry, I've done it very basically.
No, I just wanted to.
Yeah, and then the other responsibilities. Museums have collections. Particularly natural history museums, and a lot of what we know, for example, these field guides I was talking about, bird field guides, they can be mammal field guides, butterfly field guides. All of those have their origins in museum collections. Much of what we know about how birding communities, different species, how they are structured, how they interacted, how they are interrelated.
One family or one species on its own is already complex. Now you get these interactions between all of these.
Yeah, but all of that information comes from museum collections originally.
Okay.
Nowadays we can go out and we can photograph live birds and we can do sound recordings. Even those are now being archived
brought into
museums.
Okay.
Be they virtual museums or whatever. But the specimen, I spoke about that little Swi waxbill that the cat killed.
And
the museum made it into a study skin for me. So you go into museum collections, the birds department, for instance, and you'll open up cabinets with trays, and there'll be all these birds lying there, stuffed birds, so to speak, on their backs. And, so you've got those as a reference. And how do they get there? Well, they're collected. And in the old days, things would be shot. They'd go out on collecting trips, and they'd go out specifically to collect samples from particular geographical areas, bring them back, prepare them, put them into the collection, all documented. We know exactly where they came from. You'll have all the variety across aridity gradients, from wet areas to dry areas, from north to south, everything. So my job at the National Museum as ornithologist also incorporated looking after the collection, and that means just maintaining the collection, making sure it doesn't get bugs in it. So we used to have fumigation programs and all of that, but then also expanding and growing the collection. And we had collecting trips, so we'd go out and we'd actually sacrifice birds that we bring back. You just take a small sample, obviously. And there were various methods that you would use for that. Quite a lot of birds came into the collection through roadkills. That we, as people who worked at the museum, would be driving on our field trips and we'd see birds killed next to the road, pick them up, they're still in a good condition, put them in a plastic bag, bring them back, and they get prepared for whatever. And then you'd have these study skins, but you also have skeletons. The skeletons are, with the different bones and the different structures on the bones, skulls and everything.
See an owl skeleton, it's quite. It's feathers. It's like 90% feathers.
And that's the case with most birds. But still, the from a comparative point of view, the skeletons, and bones and skulls and that are important. So that's a comparative osteology collection that there is. We also another part of the collection is what we called wet specimens. So it's essentially the whole bird is injected with a what do you call it?
Like a preservation.
Yeah, preservation listen to me, preservation substance, and then it's stored in alcohol. So these bottles of whole specimens, and if you need to dissect out muscles or nerves or anything like that, you've got the material to do it. So, and then there were various other aspects of the collections. You have parasites of the feathers.
That must be scary at night.
Anyway, so
open this cabinet up.
Yeah, the responsibilities were, it was researching live and collected material.
Yeah.
Looking after the collections, and publishing on your research. So it was the outputs of the research, both scientific and popular. Okay. So you have the museum produces a popular magazine called Kulna, and most of the scientists popularize their science by writing about their work.
Yeah.
In easy to read format, layman terms. And then the exhibitions and the educational side of it, very, very important. So we would give talks to school kids. There's an education department at the museum that I'm sure as a school kid you would have been, would have sat in on talks from the tunnies from the education department. But yes, you're also as a scientist, as a researcher, you're involved in putting together the displays, the thoughts behind it, planning, and then actually getting the material that goes in those displays, and maintaining those, and then deciding, okay, it's time that we put in new stuff, update. So
for the new people.
So yeah, I was involved, for 10 years of my career at the museum was in that role.
That's fascinating. I actually, both Vida and myself, we're fans of Robert Sapolsky. I don't know whether you. He's a American. The context that I know him from is a behavioral biologist.
Okay.
And specifically in baboons or primates is his area of expertise. But I remember listening to him speak about collections of butterflies and how this almost became a status symbol of sorts, because if you were one of the few people who had this specific butterfly, it means that you spent time in, let's say, Africa. If you were a British gentleman with this specific butterfly, it was sort of your way of showing, look where I've been. I've been to Africa. So it's interesting how these collections, and as you say, collecting things and getting all of it together.
You see, let's link that back to our discussion earlier about birds and listening and everything. And how I said that so many people, they collect things and for various reasons. I mean, the noble gentry who would have sponsored these field expeditions to collect these exotic specimens. Going on those expeditions would have been something in addition to that, but many of these people would have sponsored.
They send down their scientists.
Yeah, and very often they would get named. They would get new specimens named after them in recognition of the fact that they are the sponsor of the expedition and those sorts of things. So it's fascinating, the whole story, all the stories behind these these collections in these expeditions that took place many years ago. But
unfortunately, to Africa, we didn't really send out any expeditions. We were largely pillaged for our natural resources.
Yeah, but it's amazing. But you say how the one particular butterfly would have been very special. It's the same as if you saw the Temming stint, as one of these little wading birds, it's a little brown thing that pitched up down at Strandfontein in the Western Cape, but you are part of a select group of people who got to see that, and that's quite special in the scheme of the birding community. So it works across the board.
Exactly.
So it's all very interesting. Yeah.
And I mean, that's why I'm very honored to speak to you on this topic as well. I want to touch a bit on your soundscape work as well, because I mean, I know that's something you're very passionate about, and you always talk about your sort of your sensitivity to sound and how that's always been with you. Your love for capturing environments, not necessarily through photos, but through the soundscapes. How did that start? Was it part of? I mean, I suppose birding and sound do go very closely together, but it feels like you've extended it beyond birding only.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think that I've grown tremendously in recent times, in the last couple of years, just in terms of how I view sound and sound recording. But I'll get on to that. Let's go back to the beginning. It's thinking about it. It's actually it triggered memories, and similar to your question about when did the birding start, and my first memory of that little sunbird male hovering in front of the flowers of our hedge in Grahamstown. The first thing that comes to mind when I think of my my love affair with sound, if I can put it that way, was on one of these Dyers Cross Bird Club outings as a school kid in primary school. We went down to, and it's the same mentor, the deputy principal, who was with us on that day trip. It was down to the Alexandria Forest, which is down near Kenton-on-Sea, between Kenton-on-Sea, near Bookness, Cannon Rocks, down towards PE, in that area. Yeah. Alexandria Forest, I think, is part of the Greater Addo National Park now, which stretches all the way to the Alexandria Dune Field, which is on the coast. Anyway, down there, and we were walking on a track through the forest, and this mentor of mine was very sharp with his sounds, and I think I would often ask him. I'd hear something, I'd say, "What's that? What's that?" And this particular outing, I heard this sound coming from the sort of undergrowth in the forest, and I said to him, we referred to them to our teachers as sir and ma'am. Yeah. I said, "Sir, what's that?" And he said to me, "No, I'm not going to tell you this time. I want you to go and find it. Go and find what's making that sound." And so off I went into the undergrowth and stopped and listened, and things stopped calling, and then it would start again, and it was a very loud sort of a clip, 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 clip call. And I didn't really know what to expect, but I just homed in on the sound. I just followed the sound, and eventually I found this bird that was making the sound, and it was a tiny little bird, In Afrikaans, it's called a kwekwevoeltjie.
It's the one that shouts.
No. Well, it's a tiny little bird, and the English name has changed a few times, but then it was called a bleating bush warbler. And it's a tiny little, it's similar to a wren that you get in Europe. I'm being a bit Eurocentric now, but it's a little insect-eating bird with a tiny, short little tail. And it moves around quite quickly in the undergrowth, low down. And this is one of its calls, but it's the strident, it's almost like knocking two stones against one another. Clip, 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 clip. The sound for which it was named in those days, bleating bush warbler, was more of a little beep, beep,
yeah.
beep.
So isn't that the kweevoel? Because in Afrikaans, I think we call it a kweevoel because to us it sounds like it says kwe.
No, that's a much bigger bird. That's the
big
go-away bird, the grey lory, which is the kweevoel, which is a bird of the bushveld, and it's now a bird of Gauteng.
Yeah,
it's moved in big time.
That's why I know.
So you hear that, quah, 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 and it's saying, go away, go away, go away. And this is an aside, but it's now been renamed. It used to be a grey lory in English. It's now been renamed a grey go-away bird because they're go-away birds and very closely related, same genus in East Africa. But yeah, its alarm call is this quack, and I think the name came from the early hunters where they would be hunting, and these birds would start calling, and they alert the game that they're hunting, that there's predators around or there's danger. So
they were like the alarm system for the game.
Yeah, so go away, go away. But it's onomatopoeic, but also it has that symbolism.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. Anyway, this is a tiny little kweevoeltjie because it goes quack, 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 but in forest. Anyway, so it's this tiny little nondescript little greyish brown bird, and I found it.
Yeah.
And I remember being so excited because I came back out and I said, "So I found it!
I mean, the fact that it's small makes it almost better. If it was this massive thing, it's like, but now you tracked it by sound. You tracked this tiny little thing.
And they move around, and they'll shut up, they won't call, and then they'll hop and then they'll call again. You've got to go. Anyway, so your powers of observation need to be quite good to pick up these little guys. And anyway, I remember being quite excited that I'd actually found it, but that taught me a lesson that something that I've used for the rest of my life, and it's advice that I give to people very regularly when they're talking to me about how you learn about birds and everything. And that bit of advice is that if you hear something that you don't know, if you hear a bird you don't know, go and find it. Because the whole experience, the experience of looking for it, and the memory of doing that, it just adds to.
So remember that bird forever.
I will.
Yeah.
I mean, and here I'm telling you about it.
Yes, exactly.
And I think I could go back to the exact date. I think that was the 12th of December, it wouldn't have been the 12th. We would have finished school by then, but it was early December 1976.
That is.
I was 12, 13 years old when that happened. So, I mean, that's how fixed that memory is.
That is insane.
But the association of going to look for it and everything else, and then finding it. That's what, when you're trying to learn these kind of things, people will often tell you association is important. So associate other things with that experience.
Yeah.
And that'll help you.
And that's why your mentor probably did it as well. I mean, the wisdom in that man to tell. I mean, he could have told you. He probably knew what it was.
Oh yeah, he knew exactly what it was.
He could have easily told you, but
that was his way of mentoring me, of saying, "Come on, I'm teaching you now, so go and do it."
So that was your first sound.
That's the first one I can recall.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I referred earlier to a love affair with sound. I mean, it's just become a almost an obsession, in my life since then. And I think we were chatting before we sort of went on air, so to speak, about just this, how I have to sort of remind myself that other people don't necessarily experience the sound environment that we live in every day as I do.
Yeah.
They definitely don't.
You basically have a superpower.
But and I've just, that's basically come with me my whole life, and I've fine-tuned it here and there. And I think that you can also you can also train that part of your brain to really work harder.
It's again touching on mindfulness.
Absolutely, but yeah, I think fortunately it's not something that you have to. It's not a hard grind. It just comes with time, and being out there. I mean, I get rusty as well if I don't go to a certain area with a certain habitat, be it the high altitude grasslands in the northeastern Free State or wherever, and I haven't been there for a while, and I'm back there, and there are these birds calling, and a lot of the birds up there are acoustic. They communicate acoustically rather than visually.
Okay.
So sound is very important, and they display. And many of these tiny little birds, these little kloppies and cisticolas, are flying high up, and you can't see them, But they've all got their distinctive songs, and I get a bit rusty. But it just takes me a little while to sort them out, and then
and then you're back at it.
Then the template is back in place, and we're on our way again.
You just need to load that program from the Matrix, and then you can.
Yeah, for sure. And I just derive so much pleasure, absolute pleasure and happiness from listening to soundscapes. I do a lot of sound recording, and have done more and more as time has gone on. The first time I did sound recording, and I presume it's okay that we carry on talking about this, but it was on an old cassette deck, cassette player that all of us would have had, with the little buttons that you push, rewind, forward, wind, record, play, and stop.
I'm glad you're showing size here, because I didn't know these things. It's before my time.
Before your time, yeah. I must maybe try and get a photograph of this that I can show to people. But yeah, and you slot it in the cassette tape, and you put it in, and there was a flap that you closed, and then you pushed play and record at the same time. And if you were lucky, you had a microphone that you could plug in. And that was probably the first recording I ever did was on an even older cassette player. We went for the first time as a family. We lived in Pretoria, and we went to the Kruger Park for the first time in 1974. Okay. I was 14. Was I? No. So 1977. I was 14. And we went as a family, and I remember we had a little Sanyo cassette player recorder, and a little microphone that was sort of a square thing that you would put on the table when you could record people chatting, You plug it in, and that was the microphone. And I remember walking around in Satara Rest Camp, and with this microphone, you could hear my fingers moving on it and everything. But I was trying to record a little Sakerbecky, a Mariko sunbird, beautiful song that was singing early this morning, and I think I might have got a bit of it. But anyway, then we went on a drive, and I was trying to record stuff. And at one stage, there's this, when I played back the recording, and it was like a bark. And just after that, you hear my dad, sort of whispering, "The bark was a baboon." So there was an old Bob John that had barked in the distance, and we managed to get that with the explanation.
In your recording.
In the recording. Anyway.
That's a very scary sound.
But that was far off.
Oh, okay.
It was far off. And I can even hear my dad saying it, because he started off saying, "The bark," and the noise, his words didn't really come out, and he repeated himself. So he said, "The bark was a baboon."
Because he wanted to whisper.
Yeah. Anyway, unfortunately, that recording is gone. But the memory still stands. But the recording, the first recording that I have, that I still have, the first recording that I have kept, was on a trip that I went to with friends, students from varsity. We drove from KZN up to the Okavango, and I borrowed a cassette recorder from our doctor in Durban, because he was a very keen birder, and he obviously did a bit of recording, and he had one of these shotgun microphones with a wind protector on it, a foam thing. And I remember he had an old tie that he tied on the handles of this recorder, and that hung it around his neck. So this recorder, and he said to me, Rick, you must take it with you. Take my recording setup with you and get some sounds, and this microphone. So off I went, and I've got those recordings because I'm slowly digitizing all of my analog recordings. So all these old cassette, I've probably got about 80 hours of recordings. I've done a lot of them already, but I'm reliving those early years, and yeah, it's a wonderful recording. I mean, I remember getting up early one morning. We went off on Makoros from Maun, and and we slept on little islands in the swamps for 2 nights. Just put a tarpaulin down, slept in our sleeping bags with the guide who was with us. And I got up early the one morning, and as it got light, I was recording, and there were fish eagles calling, and the lechwe bounding through the shallow water. So I've got those and various other things calling. I've still got that, so that's probably my first recording. And and over time, obviously, my equipment has improved, and what's happened more recently is, last year in October, I organized we promoted it, sort of marketed it as a national sound recording workshop. It was really just an opportunity for people with a similar interest to get together and talk sound recording.
Yeah.
It was held at Karugerip,
okay,
where we met.
Yeah.
It was I just thought it would be a wonderful venue for that because of the beautiful soundscapes that you have there. Those quiet Karoo mornings, quiet from loud from a nature point of view and from a bird point of view, but it's lovely sounds. And it was a small group of us who came together from different parts of the country, and we had a wonderful time over about a week, just chatting about sound and our experiences and talking about equipment. And some people were very experienced, others were total beginners. They came along to see what it was about.
Yeah. Again, igniting that passion within these people as well.
And we just, people, we learned from one another. And as a result, a number of the people who were there have actually upgraded their sound recording equipment, and they've now got better stuff, and they're getting better recordings. And, they are really enjoying, they used to enjoy going out and doing recordings, but with better equipment, getting better results, it's just that much more enjoyable.
You're picking up on, as you said earlier, picking up on the sound of the wind, for example.
Yeah, but one of the things that, sort of in preparation for that workshop, for that get-together, I've started following various people all over the world who do sound recordings, and what they do, what a lot of these people do, and a couple of the more experienced people who came to the workshop, they're more into soundscapes. So they will set up their recording gear somewhere, and they'll just leave it for an hour. They'll come back and fetch it, and then they'll listen and pick out the best stuff, I realized too then that it's not all about having those wind-still days when you can get clear recordings of a particular bird or whatever. It's about capturing, it's like a window of time. You're capturing a particular segment of time, and you're capturing the sound that is produced in that place during that segment of time. And wind is a very important part of that.
Yeah.
Can be a very important part of that. And so I enjoy. I've got a collection that I've built up over many years of CDs of sounds, of recordings from different parts of the world, and some of these recordings are very specific. It's particular birds that they've recorded. Others are soundscapes, so it's birds in the environment and mammals and all sorts.
Yeah.
And a very important part of that is the sound of the waves lapping on the shore, the sound of the wind in the trees, the sound of a little stream
Yeah,
You know,
the not alive natural sounds.
Yeah. And I mean, so as a result of that, I've sort of broadened my concept of sound, and I just love it. And I was sharing with you earlier about how I've been in the Karoo, and on the last afternoon of one of the 2 sessions that I spent down there recently, it was, I mean, we were doing bird surveys on a proposed wind farm, so it's a windy place.
Yeah.
Otherwise we wouldn't be there.
I don't want to ask then, but wind surveys, you want to see how the wind turbines will impact on
so
the
you basically,
birds there.
these pre-construction surveys, phase surveys, are to see what's there and to flag any potential, risks or ecological impacts that might happen. But on this particular day, the wind, there wasn't much wind, and it was incredibly tranquil out on this spot where we were doing the survey. You're required to stay in one spot, basically. You can walk around, but you're in one area with a radius of like 1.5 to 2 kilometers of a central spot. And I put up my sound recording gear. I've got stereo, 2 microphones, so it's a stereo recording. And I just put it up and I left it. And because I just wanted to capture the absolute tranquility of that place with its wind, with the wind. It was every now and then a little gust would come through, and I set up the microphones under a copse of thorn trees.
So that blocked some of so you got the wind in it, sort of.
Yeah, but also you get the wind blowing through the branches of the tree, and awesome. in the Karoo bossies. There was no grass there, but and then every now and then, you'll hear a bird chirping in the distance. And I mean, it's so dry there at the moment. They're in the 8th year of a terrible drought, and so there are very few sheep or anything on the land. It's in the veld. But in that area, it was close to a water point, so there were a few sheep around, and so you hear the odd blare in the background. But that's part of the soundscape, And I took lots of photographs as well, but I think this is, the difference for me between the visual and the acoustic or the sound is that, sure, we can look at photographs and it takes us back to a place, but nothing, absolutely nothing, takes you back to a place like the sound.
Immerses you into
so, I don't listen to music as we generally know it when I travel. I listen to my natural music. I put in my sound recordings. I've got memory stick or CD or whatever, and I put that in, and I just relive those experiences through the soundscapes that I've recorded. And it's a great thing for me too, because it keeps me up to date. It keeps me sharp on sounds, often in areas that I haven't visited for some time, listening to these soundscapes. But it's also just gives me immense pleasure in being able to just sort of spiritually connect with these places through sound.
I think I've asked you before if you had to choose between, because I think most people, if you ask them whether they wanted to lose their vision, their eyesight, or their hearing, most people would say no, hearing would be my first one to go. I think in your case it's much closer calculation. I know what.
Absolutely. If you did ask me, I'm sure I would have given you the same answer. Obviously I appreciate the visual world very much, but you cannot see the sounds if you lose your hearing. And I think that if I had to choose, I've experienced the visual world, so I know what it looks like.
Yeah.
But to live in silence, even if you can see things, and I think the frustration of not being able to hear things but be able to see them would be a lot greater than the frustration of being able to hear things but not being able to see them. I've sort of learned to paint pictures through sound.
I wonder if
not the other way around. You simply, I don't know if it's possible to compose music through sight.
I've heard of people like some of these big composers where they say if they see a piece of music, So when they hear that song, they see an actual landscape or they see colors where these sort of senses blend. So you might have some of that as well, where you can literally see these.
But you see, that will be in your mind.
Yeah.
In your mind's eye. You won't need to visually have your eyesight to see it.
Yes, exactly.
You'll still have that quality experience. But without silence, no. I wouldn't survive living in a world of silence.
I wonder if it's a trained thing, or if you actually look at your brain, like how the actual size of the area responsible for sound has developed. I think that probably lights up like a. I mean, whenever there's something appealing, I think it'll be interesting to pop you into an MRI or something, and then see how that compares to like your average Joe on sounds.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, just for my own interest this morning, I was wondering if you could identify birds by their eggs. So if I bring an egg to you, to what, I suppose it's that family thing again. You could tell me in which family it is, and you can obviously tell size and that sort of thing. But to what degree can you identify birds from their eggs?
Yeah, that's quite difficult. You could probably narrow it down to different groups based on size and color and things like that, shape maybe. But again, we've got I would go to the resources that are available. We've got a brilliant book, Birds, Nests and Eggs, that have, with all the photographs of the nest and the eggs and the descriptions and everything. Yeah. So, if you did have something, we could try and narrow it down like that. But my own knowledge doesn't really stretch that far with regard to birds' eggs.
Yeah. No, so that was just a personal question that I wanted to ask. I was actually having some eggs, and I was like, well, I wonder if you'll be able to tell where these come from.
Yeah. Then the other thing is to go to a collection. The museum has got a small egg collection. You could go and you can, again, try and narrow it down to a group or whatever.
Cool. But yeah, I want to thank you for the talk. I mean, I knew we were going to be able to have a proper talk, because when we met, I think we started chatting there at Karoo Garib, and we spoke for probably an hour and a half. My girlfriend was actually quite upset with me because we bride very late because we had to go and get the food, and she was like, you just kept on talking and talking and talking, and I didn't want to interrupt her. So I knew it was going to be something similar today, but it's always fascinating to talk to you, and I mean, I'm sure this episode's going to be awesome, and people are going to hang on your lips and the knowledge that you have to share. So thank you very much for taking the time, and not only the time with me, but the time with the community in general, and ensuring that people appreciate nature.
Yeah, Yanni, it's an absolute pleasure. And I just, it's wonderful to be able to share, with people about, my knowledge that I've developed over so many years, the passion that I have to share that. And I hope that people listening to this can derive some benefit from it, and hopefully some measure of inspiration.
Like secondary smoke, they can have secondary passion. They just feel your passion through the sound.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And let the conversation continue. Whatever that may mean. Be it. I don't know if you get response from listeners. But yes, it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you for the opportunity.
Cool. Thank you very much, Rick.
Great.
Yeah, that was another really cool episode with someone who you can tell has a passion for people, a passion for their field of study, and a passion for what they do. When I talk to Rick, we always need to cut ourselves off, like we had to with that episode, because we know we can talk for hours on end. But hopefully we can get him on another episode where we can get into his other interests as well, because he's truly such a knowledgeable guy, and he shares it in a way that makes you appreciate his view of the world to such a large extent. So hope you enjoyed that episode. Really enjoyed talking to Rick, and let's see what we're on to next.